Guys, I know this video isn't for everyone, but it really interests me. Things to know before switching to Linux by uh, uh, Genu Elections. Oh my god, how do you say it? How do you pronounce it? I don't really know, but hey, still, it's like, Linux, pretty cool, right? I mean, in case you don't know, it's like Windows alternative, pretty much like, I don't know, 1 to 2% of home users are using it, but it's pretty popular in the enterprise sector. Mostly servers and programmers work with it. But yeah, the main thing about it is that its performance can be a little better. Usually it's a little better, but like, yeah, it just performs better. The biggest thing about it, the disadvantages, is that it can't run many applications. For example, like Adobe stuff, Vegas, the editing software, obviously Microsoft stuff, and what else? Maybe some games, it can't run Valorant. It can't run League of Legends. That's because of the anti-cheat. Otherwise, the games will work. Fortnite, you can actually launch into the main menu and play for maybe like 10 seconds, but then the anti-cheat kicks you. So yeah, usually it's the anti-cheat. I don't know. Some companies are just trash, so they don't invest into better anti-cheats. Some companies say that Linux, there are more cheaters on Linux, so they don't want players playing on Linux. And what else? Yeah, I mean, some companies just don't think Linux is important. So trash companies. Let's
There
get
are a
it.
lot of videos on YouTube about why you should switch from Windows or macOS over to Linux, especially with the absolute state Microsoft is pushing Windows towards.
Yeah,
While these videos are certainly helpful for understanding why you'd want to use Linux in the first place, I figured I'd give some advice on how to make the switch. Not in terms of installing the OS, but rather the things I feel that new users should know. So the first thing you should know.
by the way, did you know that you can natively, right? You can play Minecraft on it. You can install your favorite browser, probably Chrome or Firefox, right? Probably Chrome. Even Edge is on Linux, So these you can easily install. And yeah, there is the File Explorer, Notepad like editor. I mean, the basic stuff it's all there, even the Excel and all that stuff like Microsoft Excel, Microsoft Word. These won't work natively, and I don't think it's possible to make them run, unofficially. Some software you can actually run with like compatibility layers, and but yeah, they are just like OpenOffice, I believe, or LibreOffice, is it called? Yeah, one of these two is on Linux, so
Is that Linux is not a standalone operating system. When
it's
you
a
switch to
kernel.
Linux, the thing you actually install on your computer is a Linux distro.
Yes,
So what is a distro? Well, there are a bunch of things that make up an operating system, and in the case of Linux, a distro is
it's basically it's like a kernel. Linux is a kernel, but if you are like new to computers, I would say a Linux distro is like choosing between Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 8.1, except that pretty much all of them get the same compatibility, pretty much, but it's just more about the looks. That's how I would, explain it to someone that's not really into it, into tech, but It's not the best, but
basically a default selection of those things that work well together. However, most distros are standardized to some extent. For example, most distros use Grub for the bootloader. Now, a question most beginners ask is, what distro should I use? It depends, but if I had to give a concrete answer, Linux Mint. Not because it's objectively the best or because it's my favourite, but having used
it's
it in the
not bad.
past, I can confidently say it's stable, easy to use, lightweight, and generally doesn't have compatibility issues. There's also Zorin OS if you want something that looks a bit more modern and polished, and both of these are based on Ubuntu. The second point kind of ties into the first point, and that is Linux is not Windows. Well, duh, obviously. What I mean by this is Linux doesn't function the same way Windows does. For instance, Windows uses the NTFS file system. Although Linux can read and write to NTFS drives, the main file systems would be things like ext4, Btrfs, and XFS. If you don't know what any of this means, don't worry. However, I'd argue the most significant difference, and probably the one that really matters, is how software is installed on Linux, which is usually done through a package manager, rather than downloading a file from your browser. Most package managers are...
But there is also package manager on Windows, like an official one. I think it's Winget, and then pretty much nobody uses it, but it's been introduced in like Windows 10, I believe. But yeah, I mean, you can get, and before Winget, the official one, you could get like a, community project.
Command line tools. However, many beginner-friendly distros like Linux Mint and Zorin OS have a GUI program where you can install software, kind of like an app store. Speaking of software, the third thing you should consider is the software that you use. Not all programs run on Linux.
Say something,
that's the worst thing about Linux, honestly.
I know, heartbreaking. This includes popular tools like Adobe Creative Cloud and Microsoft Office. So if you absolutely need to run Windows in some capacity, then I suggest dual booting, which is where you run Windows and Linux on the same computer. You run Linux most of the time, and only run Windows.
This is such a great tip. Install, in case you decide to install both OS, like Windows and Linux, on your computer, be sure to install Windows first, because if you install it like a second OS, then it will basically like trash your system, like because it's so stupid also.
When you need to. There are other solutions such as using Wine and running VMs, but they have their own problems. But if these
show me.
But they have
VMs with GPU pros. Oh yeah, GPU pass-through. It's GPU pass-through is basically so great because you can start Linux, and when you need something in Windows, you just open VM, and basically like you can use your whole computer's graphics card to run the VM. I know it's a little hard to understand, but basically like virtual machines can't really use all of your GPU, right? They are restricted, so you need GPU pass-through, which with the new graphics card should be easier since they like made it possible. They just they somehow are trying to make it more compatible. But nowadays usually you have to like write bunch of, you can basically have to modify your graphics card firmware, and I mean not many people do it. I even don't know like that much about it, so yeah.
Have their own problems. But if these programs are just nice to have rather than essential, then I would encourage you to look into software that does natively run on Linux, especially FOSS software, because a lot of those programs are designed for Linux first and then ported to Windows and macOS later. In my case, I was using quite a lot of free software on Windows, so I didn't have to learn a whole new workflow. And in general, quite a lot of software is natively supported on Linux, and of course you also have web apps, which I don't really like, but they are a viable option and a lot of people are already using them, and since they run in the browser, the OS is sort of irrelevant. The fourth thing I would recommend is taking the fact you use Linux into consideration. For example, when you buy new hardware. I'm not talking about devices which are basically plug and play like a USB mouse or a basic pair of speakers. I'm talking about things like printers, where drivers can be finicky. If you're looking for a printer, I would recommend the Brother HL1210W. Besides running very well on Linux, it's just a great printer overall. Likewise, if you're building a PC and you're buying a Bluetooth adapter, Wi-Fi adapter, network card, look up how well they play with Linux. I should also clarify that if any hardware or software isn't supported on Linux, it's usually not the fault of Linux, but rather the fault of the company choosing not to support Linux, especially if it's proprietary. So you sort of need this mindset of,
NVIDIA,
if they don't
for
support
example.
Linux, I don't support them. You know, you wouldn't buy an iPhone case for your Android phone and then complain that it doesn't fit. The fifth thing I would suggest is don't fear the terminal. Although the terminal might seem daunting at first, I'd encourage you to at least
You
learn
know, honestly, it's kind of crazy, but nowadays you can get a nice distro that you don't really have to use terminal at all, I believe. You know, you can just use the graphical stuff, but then you are making it essentially Windows, and Windows it's the easy way, but not the fastest way. You know, in the terminal you can do much quicker. You can do things much quicker, basically.
basics of it. And the reason is because you may need to use the terminal for troubleshooting, and it's helpful to know the gist of the commands you're running. Plus, when you become good at the terminal, it's often faster to use it for certain tasks. For example, you can install multiple programs with just one command. The sixth thing I'd recommend is, before you install Linux, and even while you use Linux, have backups. Even if you're a Windows or Mac user, you should be making backups. Things can and do go wrong.
I got none
It's not unique to
because
Linux,
it
that's
doesn't
just
work
how computers
that
are.
well, the backups.
Sometimes an update can break something, sometimes you can delete or mess something up because of human error, and sometimes you can lose data because of hardware failure. However, by keeping backups of important data, you significantly reduce the risk. Some distros like Linux Mint come with a tool called Timeshift. It can be used to back up your files, but it's more of a system restore tool. Also, keep a Linux Live USB on hand, because if you know what you did wrong, you can actually fix the problem within that live environment. Let's say you mess up your fstab file. And the final point is just about Linux gaming. Of course, not everyone plays video games, which is why I left this point until the very end. There's a misconception that you simply cannot play video games on Linux, but I've demonstrated on this channel that it just isn't the case. In fact, I've even pushed Linux gaming to its limits by running games on netbooks, cheap hardware, and even on ARM devices. So the fact that Linux
ARM
can't game at all
devices,
just
wow.
isn't true. Now, it's true that not all games run on Linux. However, a lot of popular games are natively supported. And because of tools like Valve Proton,
Nice,
Lutris,
Terraria
and the
Stardew
Heroic
Valley.
Games Launcher, a lot of Windows-only games run on Linux about as well as they run on Windows. The main limitation with Linux gaming is with anti-cheat software. Games like Valorant and Fortnite, for instance,
Yeah, I
just
said,
will not work.
yeah, basically.
However, things have gotten better.
But as
and
I said, Fortnite, you can actually run Fortnite, but the anti-cheat eventually kicks you, you know. I think it's once you land, like once you step your feet on the land, it kicks you.
I've gotten games like Dead by Daylight and Apex Legends to run on Linux. So that's it for today.
Apex, really?
I hope you enjoyed. I hope this advice was useful to you. And until next time, cheerio.
Cheerio, thank you. Oh yes, skippity sigma. Things to know before switching to Linux. GNU lectures, I guess. Oh yeah, ProtonDB is a great app. You can basically There's the Steam Proton. It's basically like a compatibility layer between Windows and Linux. Pretty good website. My grandma ran Linux Mint on her old computer for a decade, and terminal use was never needed. Yeah. Indeed, that's what I said. Hmm. Oh, parents asked me to install Linux. We have a computer again. I mean, yeah, if honestly, if you use your computer only just to browse the web, watch videos, I mean, there's no point in being on Windows. But yeah, man, nice video. Honestly, nice video. I give it thumbs up. Anyways, thank you for watching. Bye bye.